But let's get going this morning with our interview segment, because we have two personalities to give us perspectives in relation to the police service, one arm, significant arm of the protective service and services, and we talk about issues that are related to trauma and in the aftermath of that real tragedy yesterday. The investigations are continuing into the suspected murder-suicide involving two police officers. According to police, one firearm was recovered at the scene by crime scene investigators. WPC Raquel Kipps was attached to the Northern Division Senior Superintendent's Office, while SRP Constable Yuxi was attached to the Tunapuna Police Station. This latest tragedy has raised several concerns in the public domain, and we're joined now by two personalities to give us some context to the situation. We have Acting ASP Michael Seales, who is the president of the Police Social and Welfare Association. And we also have with us Hanif Benjamin, clinical traumatologist. He's also the chairman of the Children's Authority, and of course he is a traumatologist at the Center for Human Development Group of Companies Limited. Good morning, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us. Before we get a perspective from Mr. Benjamin, Acting ASP Seales, obviously a tragedy. There's no other way you can look at this situation. But what is your first reaction? Well, with the benefit of time, what is your reaction to this latest tragedy involving police officers?
Well, first, my heart goes out to the family, also to the persons who would have been close to those officers and who work with those officers. I can only imagine the extent of sadness, the way how things have unfolded. More particular when you have some of the comments coming out of the family and what was said and how it unfolded up until this morning. I mean, I would have gotten a lot of calls even this morning in terms of how people looking at it, and the thing for me is that from an association's standpoint, it happened again. And not only happened again, happened under my watch. So I have to look at what can I do to try to make sure as much as possible that these situations are mitigated. Not only mitigated, but the frequency with it, because this is not the first, and you can remember this earlier in the year. We had the issue with the two policemen at Grand Bazaar, and then not only the two policemen at Grand Bazaar, but we also had the issue of the policeman who at this station would have taken his own life, you know what I mean? So, I mean, the association can't sit down and decide, all right, this is just what you are going to do in terms of existence, and not try to make develop some type of strategy to make some inroads. And I think that's where I'm at this point in time.
And Mr. Benjamin, I mean, you're trained in this area, and we keep talking on the many occasions that we've had you on this program, especially now on our Wednesday Family Focus segment, which will be restarting in a few weeks' time. But I mean, what do you say in the aftermath of something like this?
Well, I want to join Acting ASP Seales in condolences to the family, to the both fallen officers. In addition to that, we must look at the immediate community, right? Their families, their church, their colleagues, their batch. All of these people are in fact affected. And when depression sets in and when these tragedies occur, it not only affects the victims, but it spirals into a lot of domains. And so it is critical for us to begin to have a very frontal and pointed conversation as it relates to mental illness or mental health. And when I speak to mental health, Fazir, I speak to mental good health to mental ill health. And somewhere along the continuum, we fall off the wagon because, one, people are not understanding what it is. It is still a great taboo subject in Trinidad and Tobago, more so in the protective services.
But why, Mr. Benjamin? Why is it, and of course we'll get the view of Mr. Seales in a moment. Why is it something, even when you see all this evidence, week after week, tragedy after tragedy, whether in this case police officers, but in another domestic situation arises, murder, suicide, violence towards the woman, or something else. These things keep happening. We keep inviting you and others here to talk about it. You say the same thing, and then we move on, and then it happens again and again and again. Are we doing anything about it? Why?
Well, I can tell you that as for me, I will not stop speaking, because educating the public helps move us from that place of you know, not knowing and or the tabooness, because that is how...
Okay, but are you seeing the benefits of that talking?
Definitely. In many respects, mental health has moved significantly from then to now. People are seeking treatment, not as frequently as I would like. I would like more organization to take the leap to do something about mental illness, and that is why I'm so excited with Acting ASP Seales, because too often mental health is put under the rug, but we are seeing now where it is being discussed in places where it was never discussed before. We are seeing now it is being discussed in the police service. It is being discussed at this level, especially in the police service, where mental illness is something that you don't talk about, because you have the taboo of a nation, and then you have a further taboo with the whole, you know, machismo type of situation, you know, or how one will treat a person if they come out as dealing with some form of mental illness. And that is because, Fazir, we have seen mental illness be the man on the street, the madman. And unfortunately, that is only but the end result. Along this continuum, and the World Health Organization is saying 4 in 5 will suffer from depression. You know, 10 persons will commit suicide every day. You know, I mean, when you look at the statistics, and we are not immune from those statistics, it is saying that we are not dealing with mental health frontally. I am excited that we are moving, but we must move further. We must begin the conversation at different levels, and not just the conversation, but we need to become real. We need to become practicable. We need to put things in place. Too often we are doing this after the death, after the tragedy, after the shooting. I want to be able to come here and do this before and say we were able to stop. We were able to intervene. We were able to help. And we are not doing too much of that. We are doing a lot of this. And that is the tragedy in the story here.
Okay, Acting Inspector Seales, Acting ASP Seales, sorry, I don't want to demote you, as I demoted you
Please
earlier.
promote me.
Yes, but let's talk about this in real terms. Is this something that police officers, the police service, is willing to discuss openly among yourselves? I
think so, because one of the things that we look at, historically, you have to look at what was the context of the policeman, and what would have happened before. If you look at some years ago, when anybody heard that you were going to visit Dr. Bontier, which is really an issue with mental health, you are labeled for the rest of your life in the police service. For example, you know, we have an acronym, Mike Able Dog. So from the time you hear Mike Able Dog coming, you know, hey, there's a madman. But in the true sense, that person may not be mad. But the point is that stigma stays with you. And that has created an environment that persons do not wish to come forward. Even in acts of infidelity and having to talk about it and try to get that intervention, as Mr. Benjamin would have said, we have situations where persons are so ashamed, so paralyzed with fear that they don't move to try to access service. The association has opened up itself to try to receive some of these persons in the most confidential way. We would have had a social worker on, and our experience, I mean, one of the things that they say, I must say today, lessons learned, is that the way our response was sometimes inadequate, because you had to outsource the professional to make that intervention, as Mr. Benjamin saying. So my job here today and this morning, and some of the conversation that I would have had with Mr. Benjamin, is to make sure that that conversation, that narrative changes, and we make sure that that becomes a mainstay and it's institutionalized in our approach.
But are your members willing to be part of that dialogue? And I understand the point that you're making about our socialization, because one, we celebrate infidelity, like a deputy essential, yet we ridicule the soft man. Yes. So it goes both ways. So on the one hand, this is a country that makes a great deal out of infidelity, and on the other hand, ridicules the victims of the infidelity as well.
And you know, I mean, without going into the specifics of this tragedy, one of the things that came out of it is the fact of the issue of ridiculing, because the gentleman was the subject of scorn and pick-on and these things. This really happened, you understand me? And it hurts my heart to talk about it. But the fact is
that was happening on social media as well? That was
happening on social media. It was happening everywhere in relation to this person who has lost his life. But more importantly, one of the things you have to understand is that the association has started that conversation, and we would have started that conversation a long time ago. Just we did not have the ability to source expertise as Mr. Benjamin. More importantly, the commissioner is on board, because what would have happened is that we had some dialogue as to how we now move our employees assistance program. And it still is in the whole issue of a draft, right? But even the draft that I have seen has to now take into account the treatment of mental health, and we have no facility in that. So we have to develop that. Before
I bring Mr. Benjamin back in the discussion, but it must be concerning that, I take your point about all the ridicule and whatever else, but it must be a source of concern that police officers, whether SRP or fully fledged police officers, find themselves in a situation. Again, we're not talking about necessarily the specifics of this tragedy, whether it is a relationship gone wrong, and even the ridicule, that they seek violence as an option. It speaks to some failing in the system somewhere that results in an individual, never mind the level of ridicule, will rather than walk away, and rather than say, look, you could say what you want, I am stronger than that, I'm just going to walk away, ups to violence.
Well, I think that's the expertise questions here that rests with Mr. Benjamin.
And you're quite right, Fazir. And the reason why you're seeing violence is because it is the nature of the organization. The organization is a very active organization, and that is their training, that is what they know. And when you look at suicidality, people move to what they know best. You see, failing that, you go to the internet and you try to find other mechanism. But if it is that I carry a firearm, chances are that I will meet my end via that means. And so it is not a phenomena to say, you know, the violence, it is because of the organization in which you operate.
But doesn't that speak to the discipline? Shouldn't we expect, whether it's police officers, whether it's prisons officers, whether it's army or whatever, to be either trained with a level of discipline that would cause them to not opt automatically to the firearm to settle a particular issue?
That's really a non-issue. The discipline has nothing really to do with my mental ill health. Mm-hmm. What it really deals with is your emotion and your inability to manage your dysregulated emotion. At that point, when a person gets to a place of no return, you have moved from depression to despair. Once you get to a place of despair, there is no controlling of your emotion, and that is what they act on. They don't act on, well, I'm a trained officer, I should know better, or I should, because you have people who commit suicide at all ranks, from politician all the way down
that is correct.
To people.
Okay, so how then do you prevent from getting to that position of despair where all rational thinking goes out the window?
And I think Acting ASP speaks to that. It is about getting early intervention, recognizing the signs and symptoms, and treating with the signs and symptoms. Because I tell you this, every person who commits suicide or attempts suicide has a sign that is out there, like, hey, it's happening to me, I need help. How we interpret that and how we act on that is going to be important. And I think that is where the failing is. We get the red flags, the blue flags, all the flags are there. However, how we respond to that is going to be critical. So far, we are not responding well enough. It is happening, and then we are coming in to say, oh, we are so sorry, and the family, which is all well and good. But we need to understand the signs and symptoms. We need to help people understand that mental illness, depression, is not a life sentence. The fact that you are going through a difficult period doesn't mean that your life in general is difficult. It means that you are dealing with a serious issue now that requires an assistant. And as ASP is saying, you know, getting that level of assistance to help a person unravel the challenges that they are facing mentally. And we are failing in that respect. And so it is not really about their training, lack thereof, but it is how do we get in front of the depression? How do we get in front? You see, people think it's depression, open your window and you'll be all right, go and take a walk, you understand? And in Trinidad, boy, let me go and take a drink and we're good to go. You see, so you develop a negative coping mechanism which solidifies the information that is going through your mind. Because, Fazir, what is going on here is when you get into despair, your mind has taken control and is telling you that no matter what, I cannot see a way out. And once you reach to that point of no return, that's it. That man or woman is going to die. They are going to die. right, once you get to a point of despair. So the question for me as a traumatologist and a clinician is, how do we get in front? We get in front a number of ways. By educating people about mental illness, depression, and how to deal with it, creating a proper AAP service that is not just in-house, but you have people who can go in a comfort zone where they feel safe. Because you and I both know from the time, and you said it, from the time I come across as MAD, that's it. Your career is, you are now going to turn a desk junkie for the rest of your life. And your colleagues are not going to trust you sufficiently out there. And if I can't trust you going out on a, whatever you all call it, a exercise or what, then I don't want you there. And if I cannot do what I came into the service to do, then this is over. Life is done for me.
We're going to take a break in a short while and continue the discussion. But Acting ASP Seales, given that situation, are you confident that officers are in a position generally where they are willing to talk these things out, where they are willing, to quote what Mr. Benjamin is saying, is to get in front of the depression rather than to be seeking treatment afterwards?
Well, I am certain this has brought it to the fore. And then it's important too, because now we have to understand how mechanisms are triggered in the police service, or even in the country in terms by and large. What has happened for us is that this, for them, is an isolated event in terms of their mindset. The problem right now is that should it have been a first division officer being shot by that same officer, you would have seen the response, you understand me, from the position of our mindset in a responding to those type of issues. What will happen now, and that's my fear, is that we have other persons like that in the police service, you know, because we are in a high-stressed environment. The commissioner is calling on us to have some type of responses that are consistent with intensifying our ability to act with violence and deal with situations. So we have to now understand that because that environment exists, it must not be the only response in any given situation in terms of responding to a problem, which is what police officers normally do after. First, I have to recognize the trend that is developing, because if you look at the situations in terms of the tragedies that we have had, they are so closely connected, you cannot ignore it and understand that it is developing and it's developing inside law enforcement. And I would have had the opportunity to at least sit with Mr. Benjamin, some things that were revealed to me. I felt that, listen, I am compelled, and I'm compelled to act, and have to understand that I start with awareness. Once I start with awareness, then it unfolds for the rest of officers to say, listen, I am going to seek help. If it's through the association or through the organization, I am going to seek that help.
6:41 in Trinidad and Tobago. Let's take that break before we continue our dialogue with our two guests, traumatologist Hanif Benjamin and Acting ASP Michael Seales, President of the Police Social and Welfare Association, in the aftermath of yet another tragedy, yet another murder-suicide, and beyond all of the gossiping and the social media nonsense and even the general old talk that follows or precedes tragedies like this. We are at least trying somehow to get some sense of it and working towards, as Mr. Benjamin said, most appropriately, getting ahead of situations like this rather than just coming every Monday morning to talk about the tragedy of the weekend. We'll be back right after this. Hello, as we have with us a clinical traumatologist and chairman of the Children's Authority, Hanif Benjamin, together with the head of the Police Social and Welfare Association, Acting ASP Michael Seales, as we talk about different issues within the police service, and not just about protecting and serving with pride, but also the personal issues that may affect police officers in the aftermath of the tragedy yesterday, or what appears to be a murder-suicide situation involving SRP Michael Yuxi and WPC Raquel Kipps. Mr. Benjamin, what are you looking for? Signs and symptoms when we talk about specifically such a stressful environment as the police service?
You know, some of the things that you can look for, and you know, one of the things that Acting ASP spoke about is the whole camaraderie, the people and stuff. So what I want officers to start to look out for are sudden, you know, people taking risk. whether it is on or off duty, taking too much risk, unnecessary risk. So you go out and exercise, you notice a person behaving in a particular manner. That is one of the major things you look for, is shift in attitude and demeanor, and change in motivational and performance behavior. So you was a good officer, you're motivated, and then all of a sudden you are dejected, you are behaving in a demotivating manner, you're not out there as you need to, you're disheveled, you're no longer taking care of yourself. Those are some basic signs to look for. Statements of hopelessness, like, this don't matter no more, take care of my family, if anything ever happened to me. Those are some of the conversation that you will hear in locker rooms or in the vehicles. You wanna pick up on that. That is not something that one would say likely. You want to talk about loss of interest. That's a major one. You no longer want to hang out. You no longer want to do things with your family. You no longer want to get involved. Those are the basic things that you're going to look out for. The sudden use of terminal type of statements, finalities. Everything now is spoken to as if there is no tomorrow. Right? There's no plans. All of a sudden, the plans that you had for down the road is no longer important. Everything seems to just be terminal, cutting and going. Right? You're talking about depression setting in. So you're talking about loss of interest to eat and sleep and stuff like that. Your family need to be aware of that. You're losing weight just like that. Stuff like that. Or you're coming and all of a sudden now you're no longer interested in what is going on the job when you were very much interested in the job. And of course, you're talking about increased signs of negative coping mechanism. For example, alcoholism, overt sexual behaviors, and different types of things like that. Even, some police might be on private range or want to go and shoot often, something, those heightened type of activities, you should raise your eyebrow, and a supervisor should be trained enough to pick up that. Your colleague should be trained enough to say something going on with Hanif. We need to talk to Hanif, or we need to talk to the supervisor. But the challenge is, if we don't know what to look for, it passes right in front of our very eyes, and we don't know, and then everybody's shocked. They're like, oh my God, I didn't know this was going to happen. And
we'll get some more detail on that in a moment. But Acting ASP Seales, the whole question of how does the institution of the police service respond to yet another tragedy involving its officers. What is your concern in that area?
Now, my concern in this area is that you would have had the conversations before, right, leading up to what would have transpired. And I would have seen over time the different issues that would have resulted in these tragedies was always discussed before that. As Mr. Benjamin said, we saw the signs. You understand me? But the point is that we saw the signs, but what did you do? And that's really what's the issue for me. And the point is that early intervention is important, and where we can really change the direction or the course of thinking of the person. But I have to look at what the organization response normally is. Firstly, when you have that, the only route for a person is to say, who do I trust to speak to, right? Let's say if that person do decide, or the signs are in fact there, and that second person decides to talk about that person. Normally it goes to the senior officer, which is normally the commander of the division. But I don't think that the response from that level, you understand, it generates into something that gets us to a meaningful result. And I say that without hesitation. Now we have what they call peer counselors trained, so that they can in fact now see this, understand what is happening, and now transfer to the social worker, which is the next level. The social worker then intervenes. There is the treatment for them, but the social worker has to now outsource the expertise, which is extraneous, which is outside of the police service, which is important. Now, here the problem for us. Right now, that whole facility is staffed for money. So that is one thing, because anything you're doing at this point in time in the police service must require money, unless you have persons coming in terms of volunteering to do something first. Even the fact that one particular person would have complained in that system, complained when I would have made some comments before, right here on this show, and they were very displeased.
A lot of things tend to happen when you're right here on this show.
Of course, you know that too. So they were very displeased. But the point is that my conversation is always to try to change and enhance what we are doing. Because I recognize as an organization, if you do not have an appropriate response, and not only an appropriate response that is institutionalized, then we are coming back to talk to you again, Fazia,
you see,
to have this.
I'm glad. Why is it? What is it about our personality that people could recognize that there are wrong things going on, but you're not supposed to talk about it, like you're trying to embarrass me or what, and that people who should be fixing the problems are more upset with you and others for speaking out about those problems?
Well, for me, and I also defer that question to Mr. Benjamin, because he's the person who can answer that. But I'm going to say it from my experience and the lessons learned. Because, as he said, it's taboo. But here's the problem. My problem is not that it's taboo, you know. My problem is that if you don't speak about it, nothing changes. And even if you do speak about it, you have to now measure what changes. And that's a difficult thing for me, because we are here sitting here. Remember, we were talking here, right here, about the 2 policemen in Grand Bazaar.
Yes.
Right here.
Yes.
But what is different from what happened with the policemen in Grand Bazaar and what happened yesterday? Nothing is different, right? The only thing we have to now look at is what was the response by the organization. And the organization has a responsibility, because these are your employees. And but for that environment, they would not have met. And for that environment, it would not have generated to this. And it's an important part that we have to look at. How does the organization respond? Now, my vision for the organization responding in this way is what it obtains internationally. Internationally, it looks at how do we treat mental health illness in the workplace. And you have to now understand it. It's compulsory for law enforcement internationally that if you are involved in a shooting, you must be psychologically evaluated. Must. It's imperative. It doesn't exist in our jurisdiction. Let me say that one time. So our normal practice, the practice that I would have experienced from before is, listen, let's go and have a drink. Let's talk about it, you understand me? And right after you have your drink, you know, you prepare a statement to go to court. But there's no hope of you being able to be, sis, let's talk about it. You know, that's a problem for me. And I have to try my best to influence some way that this mustn't be the reality for every policeman after that. We need to change that, and we need to change it now.
Mr. Benjamin, what is your perspective?
For me, the question is, how do you ensure that the men and women who are charged with the responsibility, awesome responsibility to protect, and I tend to go a little further because I talk about all of protective services in this country, as with all over the world, how do you begin to protect their mental health? Because at the end of the day, you want these men and women who are standing in our defense to be of sound mind, right? Acting ASP spoke about, you know, mandatory counseling, and you will find for some high-powered departments and or specialized unit, they are mandated to go to receive counseling once a month, twice a month, just to make sure that everything is okay. And so we need to move like, you know, the commission and everybody's moving to this new type of policing, the new 21st century type of policing. This must be part of it. We must also understand that ensuring that the mental well-being of our men and women are of sound nature. And so it requires a certain type of institution, a certain type of understanding. And I think for a lot of instances, we need to educate the persons in charge as to why it is we are having police officers out there who might be angry, who might be vexed, who might be this, how they treat with the public. And you see, it all intertwines, you know. And until we begin to see the larger picture, right now we keep zoning in on small areas, but those small areas from a larger perspective tells us the challenges we have in our service. And so we need to understand that sometimes our officers who are in constant high stress and high demand is being called upon to produce from all manner of people in society. That in itself is a burden.
I'm glad you raised that point, because we'll be heading up to the top of the hour, by the way. We'll continue this dialogue till just around 7:15, I should point out. I was stopped by a retired prison officer on Independence Square, was it last week? And he was telling me about he's writing a book. He was telling me some of his experiences. He said that he come to work on a Monday morning and let's say inmate so-and-so, hey, officer, so you know how long I waiting for you? I had this for you. And empty the bucket of feces right on his uniform and everything. And he basically said that this is normal. This is the sort of experiences that you would have on a regular basis in the prison's environment. These are things that we so-called ordinary citizens on the outside could never possibly understand, and therefore can't fathom the circumstances, how that affects you mentally in dealing with ordinary issues. And therefore, Mr. Benu, I'm glad when you bring in the other arms of the protective services, are we expecting too much?
First, Jerry, before he answers, let me just say, don't say he told you that. That happened yesterday in Bedford Street Police Station, right? It happened to one policeman when 4 prisoners threw feces at him. So don't say it happened in the prison service. It happens in the police service also, Mr. Benjamin.
So just a minute. I mean, how are we, given that sort of environment, which speaks to a lot of different issues as well, as per usual, nothing gets sorted in Trinidad and Tobago, are we expecting too much?
I am not sure if we're expecting too much, but I think that what we need to do is mitigate expectation with reality. And I think that is where we have the challenge, because one cannot negate the fact that you are now specially trained, and therefore your mental tenacity moves to a different level than the ordinary man. However, even in moving to that level, if you don't treat with the mental fallout, you're going to have chaos and confusion within the service. You must also understand that with the police, the prison, the army, everywhere, there's a culture that is pervasive within. And so an officer in whichever branch must now become accurate with that culture and the challenges that comes there. And it comes now to people like acting inspectors in ASP Seales to ensure that they are now protecting that higher level, because we are asking the police to do a lot. We are asking the protective services to do a lot. But the question is, are we giving them the tools mentally to ensure that that a lot that we are asking them is done with the best intention and to preserve their mental health? Because I'll tell you this, Fazira, and you could probably talk about it after the break. I see the trickling effect. I see the divorce rate. I see the level of domestic violence. I see the breaking up of families. That is what I see. I see a system where if you don't give them the level of help and protection they need, it trickles elsewhere. And that trickling of elsewhere is now seeing a breakdown of the overall family life. And we need to preserve our family life.
We do? In Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, I'm fighting for it.
Well, I wish you all the best, because Carnival come in and there's always a rum bottle you could empty your sorrows into. We're taking a break. We're preempting the news this morning because there are some serious issues we're discussing with our 2 guests. We'll be back right after this break here on Morning Edition.